Okay, all right, what's up everybody? Hello, welcome to the first session of Gynecology Seminar for 2018. My name is Aishwarya Super, in case you forgot over the break. And we're in Gynecology 4 with advanced topics. Thank you so much for being here, it really means a lot to see all your smiling faces. I want to start the class by saying woohoo, Happy New Year. But also, I think you guys might have seen what I posted in the page. So I've been invited to write a blog post for a magazine called Step Up Magazine. And like in the email, they said that they attract an audience of people who want to create change. So they asked me to write a list of 10 things that people can do to like help improve female reproductive health, like in their community, for people who might want to get involved. So I don't usually assign homework, but it's like taking me some time to come up with things, and I really want you guys to get involved. So just comment something, and I'll send them a list of like the comments and the people's names, and then we'll see like if they publish it or not. So just like, please, for the love of God, comment something. Thank you. Like I can come up with it, but I just like really want to hear, your new choices. Please do. Please. Thanks. Yeah.
When do you want to have like a list done by?
They didn't give me a deadline. They were just like, when it's done, send it over. So preferably before next session. Like that's like a solid week, like just one thing, preferably with detail. Thanks. Okay.
Are you gonna make like a separate post about it for that?
Yeah, sure, I'll make a separate post.
Okay.
But I think like 2 people have already commented on the original post. So I think I'll just like, do you just want to stick with that? I think I'll just stick with that, yeah. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about intersex. And I don't want to say like people who are intersex, but we're going to talk about the biological phenomenon of intersex. And we're also going to talk about the social implications of being intersex, And that was a story that I was reading before break, so I'll just like continue to read it today. So I just want to give you guys a story. This is what happened in like my own personal life. It was last year, and like this is actually how I met one of my friends on Hall. Is we were sitting at lunch and we were talking about intersex people. And so this one person at the table was like, "Hey guys, can we?" I think they were non-binary, but they were like, "Hey guys, can we just like please not talk about like intersex people? It makes me very uncomfortable." And I was like, "Okay, okay." I can like understand if like I was talking about sexual assault and that made you uncomfortable. Like if I was like saying like 1 out of every 4 women gets sexually assaulted and that made you uncomfortable, I can like understand. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of like intersex, I was like, yeah, intersex people lack the enzyme hydroxylase 21 that makes it difficult for them to process androgens in the blood system. And that's why oftentimes secondary sex characteristics are repressed within intersex people. And they were just like, I'm uncomfortable with this. Can we not talk about it? And like, that's fine. Like, if somebody's very uncomfortable with something, I won't talk about it. But that's just like me kind of like talking about lungs. And like, if somebody was like, I'm very uncomfortable talking about lungs, can we not talk about them? Like, and it just like made me like question, like, there's been a lot of times when people have been like, Rashmi, I'm uncomfortable with this, like, can you stop talking about it? And I have, But it just like made me question, like, the girl I was sitting at the table with was also like, oh, so if you're intersex, like, what would your genitals look like, which is a question that a lot of people have. And then the person like kind of shamed the girl for asking, but it was just like, if you're shaming someone for not knowing something, and you're also barricading them from getting that knowledge, then the problem will never be solved, And that was just an issue that like I had faced once, and like I was able to like come back from it, and obviously I'm able to talk about intersex people now. But it was just like kind of an issue that I saw, and I hope I can like clear things up for you today when we talk about intersex, both the biology and the sociology. Any questions? No? Okay, cool. All right, I'm just gonna jump right into it. Oftentimes when we talk about intersex people, like if you Google like intersex online, you'll find a lot of like sociological impacts of being intersex. But we're just gonna like get right into the bio, okay? I'm just gonna teach her a presentation that this one person did. I'm gonna go ahead and credit them real quick. It is Dr. Veronica Drance. And intersex spokespersons Alex and Muggsy prepared for her day at the Center on Halsted in June 11th, 2011. It's just a lot of biology. It's very difficult for me to remember, so I'm just going to tell you. All right, so intersex people are about as common as redheads. And if you notice, we have a redhead in this classroom. So it's about 1.25, like 3.75% of people are intersex, I think. And we definitely have someone in this school, maybe. Like, I'm just going off statistics. Like, we should theoretically have someone in the school. But, so a lot of people, like, kind of get freaked out about intersex because they don't really know what it is. And a lot of people are too scared to ask. And so today we're just going to break it down. So does anybody know basic biology can tell me which chromosome pair is XX and XY? So a sex determining pair. Which one is that? Come on, y'all. So all humans have 44 chromosomes, yeah? Yeah. Which pair contains the sex determining chromosomes?
It's 46.
It's 46. My bad. Okay. Well, it's the I think it's the 22nd or 23rd pair.
It's 23rd.
23rd. Okay. Cool. Because I was just like doubling it. I was like, it's the 22nd pair, and then I doubled it, and I was like, okay, that's 44. All right. Well, usually it's like if you have this is the 23rd pair, right? Or the last pair. So if you have XX chromosomes, that denotes that you're female, right? So all eggs carry one chromosome. It's X. Sperm can carry either X or Y, which, well, that's another X. All right, and we all know if you have XY, then you're male. Right? That's how it usually is supposed to go, but biology obviously isn't that simple. So some people are born with like XXY, or like XXXY, and oftentimes these people have Klinefelter syndrome, right? And so this usually means that like people with this syndrome can be a little taller because of that extra X, and they also will have trouble processing androgens. By the way, androgens are chemicals, like are hormones in the body that help determine secondary sex characteristics. So like waistline or like breast tissue or like, facial hair, that's determined by androgens. And so what a lot of people might not know is that like in embryo, okay, every single mammalian body plan is inherently female, like in embryo. So female is the default and male is the alteration. So if you're default, then you're, obviously female. But if you're male, then it's a fully altered state. Yeah, you guys knew this? Good job, congratulations. How'd you know it? Where'd you hear it?
It's just really something I've heard before.
Yeah, obviously, it's pretty basic. Okay, so I'm just gonna find, there's like a whole signaling cascade that goes on with intersex people. It's very difficult to explain, you guys. All right. Okay, so the protein that is found on the Y chromosome is called SRY. So it's called the sex determining region of the Y chromosome. And basically, the Y chromosome, okay, so you know that everybody's like female technically in utero, right? And so basically what the Y chromosome will do is it will produce a series of hormones that will like increase the amount of steroids or increase the amount of androgens in the embryo, and that's what causes male testes and like male reproductive organs to form over female ones, right? So like if these steroids were not released, and that's a hormone called Mullerian like inhibitor hormone, that's what this Y chromosome produces, and that hormone inhibits the Mullerian dyes, which normally would produce like estrogen, from like producing it, and then like a male will develop, So yeah, for like females, like it just doesn't happen. Like Mullerian inhibiting hormone doesn't get released, and you just obviously like form into a female, right? Is that clear? I know that gets a little confusing. Is that clear? That it's like everybody understand? Okay, and you can like see evidence of this like in the body. Like I think we've gone over when we talk about the clitoris. The clitoris is basically like a little penis, I probably talked about that. And like if you're male, like biologically male, I think there's like a little line like underneath the scrotum where you can like see where the labia has bonded together in embryo. Should be right there. Just let me know if you find it one day. I'm interested to know. I've never looked at it like up close, So yeah. So just let me look. But yeah, I think that's like straight up evidence. Okay, so oftentimes when intersex people are born, like what happens is the proteins might not fold correctly, like the hormone might not be released properly, and you will be born with like varying degrees of female to male genitalia. So usually there's a spectrum, from one side being all the way male to the other side being all the way female. And I don't want to imply that male and female are opposites, because like I said, they originate from like literally the exact same thing. right? And so usually there's like, some people might be like, might have more like masculine genitalia, which means that like, okay, I'm more familiar with the more feminine case. It means like you might have like an enlarged clitoris that looks kind of like a penis, you know, but you still have a labia and like a vaginal opening. And if you'd like to see like detailed pictures of intersex genitalia, they're on slide 17 of this presentation, which I will upload to the page like right after this session. And so it's like that's usually a question I get, like what do your genitals look like if you're intersex, you know? And like it's a really touchy question, but it's like if you don't know, then how are you supposed to continue to educate yourself? So if you're like more masculine, then you might have like a reduced penis or maybe a labia that's not fully closed, right? Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to explain. Like in embryo, when the genitals are developing, they just like kind of look like this, right? So like usually if you like develop into more male, like the penis will form and like the labia will like kind of zip up. Look, let me live. The labia will kind of zip up, you know, and like the scrotum will form. Yes, and that's how like typically like the male transition takes place. And then for the female transition, it's basically just like an enlarged version of this. Like there's a clitoris, labia, you know, the labia like opens, like in a labia, you have like you've all seen this depiction before. I put it on the board like thousands of times. But there's always like intermittent stages between these different areas, you know. Okay, so that's just like the primary sexual characteristics of intersex people is genitalia. So what we have to deal with afterwards is secondary sexual characteristics. Can anyone tell me what hormones are produced by the ovaries? Progesterone? Yeah, progesterone. And there's like one really big one. Yes, oh my god, good job! I was like really concerned. I was like, do you not know this? Okay, yeah. So obviously if you develop into like a default female, you have ovaries that produce estrogen, right? And so those estrogens will help develop secondary female sexual characteristics in the body. So like, you know, breasts and like you know, like waistlines, like hip fats, thighs, like you know what I'm saying? So it's like typically secondary sexual characteristics, like smaller larynx, a higher voice. And if you are male, can anyone tell me what form is the like the scrotum? No, the testicles. Yeah, produces testosterone. Yeah, good job, you guys. Yes. Oh my god, it took me so long for the estrogen one. I was like, oh my goodness. All right, so testosterone is what like the male sexual organs produce. And obviously that like lends itself to a lower voice, like broader shoulders, reduced fat in the chest. You know what I'm saying? And so intersex people may have, and I was saying this before, may have a deficiency of an enzyme called hydroxylase 21. I'm pretty sure that's the enzyme. Might not be it, but what I do know is, like I said, like there are androgens produced in the body, right? So intersex people might have difficulty with androgen receptor sites, like in the body, like they might not have formed properly due to like a misformation of the primary sexual organs. And so if you're not able to process androgens, then you might not develop like proper secondary sexual characteristics, or you might develop like secondary sexual characteristics that are like more masculine or more feminine. Right, like you see what I'm saying? Like somebody who is more on the female side of like the intersex spectrum may develop more male sexual characteristics if that person's androgen receptors are damaged, right? And this is vice versa for somebody on the male side. Okay? Okay, so that determines secondary sexual characteristics. And so that's why like oftentimes intersex people, like, I don't want to say it like wins to the loaf or something, but that's why oftentimes intersex people, their secondary sexual characteristics may not be as apparent. Okay, cool. So oftentimes what happens when an intersex baby is born is that doctors will perform like a sex assignment surgery. So like if there's an enlarged clitoris, the doctor might like, you know, snip it, like trim it down or something, like make it resemble more of a female sexual organ so that that child can live their life as a female. And if the child is born more on the male side of the spectrum, then the labia may be stitched up, or a sexual reassignment surgery would be performed to allow that child to live more as a male, right? There was like a really heartbreaking experiment conducted with this set of twins, where like one, like they were both born biologically male, I think, and one twin lived as a man, and the other twin was like forced to be raised as like female. It was like back in the day when bioethics wasn't a thing, and so like that poor child, like he was raised as like a girl, and so like he like suffered so much psychological damage, and when he grew up, he like was like his dad like told him what happened, why they were raising him as a girl, and he like flipped, and then now he lives his life as a man. So that's good, but it was like really sad. It was to prove the point that like gender is something that's learned and not something that is like inherently natural. But obviously, like he lives as a man now, so it could prove that gender is natural. But as Judith Butler says, all genders are performance. There's only like natural sex, And we also see intersex in the animal kingdom. So, does anyone know what happens with clownfish?
They change.
Yeah, they're hermaphroditic. They like change the gender. So, like, if the female in a group of clownfish dies, like the dominant male will become female. Yeah, so all this to prove that gender is very confusing, as is biological sex. So now you know. So yeah, I think that's like all you really need to know about intersex. Does anyone have any questions? No? I'll post this presentation online so that you can learn more about like the basic biology of gonad formation. Yes. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone have any big questions or anything? Okay, cool. Well, I guess I'll like jump into the story then. Another thing to know about intersex people is it's really a question of bioethics. Like if somebody is born intersex, like do you want them to live their life as an intersex person, and maybe be persecuted in the country that they live in? Or are you going to make the decision to like let them live as a female or let them live as a male, even though they might not be happy in that situation? So it really is a decision of bioethics, and it's like really a very tricky field to go into. Like, what if you do if somebody's like truly in the middle? Like, what if you do if somebody has like both sexual characteristics? Yeah, it's very difficult. Okay. Well, I think I'll ask you this question. If like you were an obstetrician and you delivered a baby who was intersex, but maybe on more of the female side of the spectrum, would you, as a doctor, perform the surgery to like force that child or like allow that child, I guess, to live their life as a female? Or would you just leave the genitals? Like, what would you do? Yeah, Shem.
Well, I don't think that biological sex is necessarily correlated to gender.
Mm-hmm.
But also, on the other hand, like, I'm just the doctor, and I don't really think it's my place to decide whether or not I'm going to be doing that. So I'd probably like consult the parents and let them decide. But like ultimately, I don't really think that your gender and like self-identity is raised is like due to your genitals. It would be more due to like what the parents told the kid, like how they treated them, like, oh, like you're a girl, so you do this, or like, oh, you're a boy, so you do this.
Anybody else? Like, there's an issue with talking to the parents too. Like, I've heard some people say like, oh, like the parents can't control what the child wants, and it might be better to do the surgery earlier on in life when it might not have very many psychological impacts. But yeah, there's always arguments on other sides of the case. Anybody else? Yeah.
I mean, I would personally think that maybe it would be better to just leave the child as is and then wait to see how they identify, and then, if necessary, make an alteration, which clearly, like, it's more difficult to do surgery later on in life. But I just think it could have some very bad side effects if you decide to assign the child a gender which they end up not identifying.
As a parent, I would have my kid have surgery, but like as a doctor, I wouldn't do decide.
Like, it's like, what if you're born in a country maybe where intersex people aren't as well accepted? Like, what do you do in those cases?
Like, it's hard growing up to, like,
when you're little, you don't necessarily realize other people aren't like you.
Yeah.
So it could be kind of confusing for the kid at first.
Yeah. Yeah, like you're like completely correct. Like I know in India, there's a lot of babies abandoned because they're born intersex. They end up dying, but some of them get saved. You know, some of them. Yeah, I like was reading a story the other day about this like baby who was found like straight up in a garbage can, like straight up like a live baby found in a garbage can. It was a female fetus, like, but like it was like a dead baby, like straight up, and I was like, oh my goodness, like Indian people. And then I just like. Went about my day. But anybody else have anything? I'm sorry, anything to say? Like, what would you do in that situation? You have anything to say, Jesse?
No, I don't.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely like it's a tough issue, you know. Okay, if anybody else has like nothing else to say, I guess I'll like get on with the story about what it's like to like live intersex. Okay, cool. All right, it's a story in red. I'll like start back with it again. There's also like Spanish words in this that I can't say, so I apologize. I took like so much French. So, like George, if you want to say them, like it's fine. Like, do you want to? You can like correct me. Okay. All right, so here's the intro. Oh wait, never mind. That's not the intro. Wait, it says introduction, but it's not the intro to the story. Okay. Pop culture, BuzzFeed, periods. Okay, cool. Okay, this is the one. This is the one. All right. I'm a woman with male chromosomes. Oh, it's called She'll Become a Woman Later. I'm a woman with male chromosomes. This means I never developed breasts or experienced menstruation, but nonetheless, I was raised as a woman. Nothing about my appearance ever led others to believe that I was anything but a girl. As a child, my personality seemed unique only when I compared myself to the girls in my family. Unlike my sisters, I was a proud, oh my god, merry macho who loved sports. Yeah, okay, was obsessed with The Simpsons and would find any reason to stay in school longer. By middle school, my womanhood was a playful deceit propped up by benign teenage lies. I would have to pretend to have my period so I could skip math classes and stare aimlessly out the bathroom window. I knew plenty of girls who lied about getting their period. Sitting in the stall, I would think about bleeding and what it would feel like. While my classmates awaited their periods, I remember my first encounter with menstruation. When I was 9, one of my older sisters, Nana, got her period. When Nana and our eldest sister, Rosa, locked themselves in the bathroom, I banged on the door, demanding to know what was happening. Rosa opened the door and proudly announced, Nana is a woman now. Nana was 10. She showed me some underwear and the bathroom was smelly. I thought the whole situation was gross and walked away, shaking my head, saying to myself, that is definitely not happening to me. And it never did. It wasn't until my 9th grade biology class that I began to pay more attention to lessons about female puberty. A very pregnant Miss Cox lit up her overhead projector and began a lesson on the menstrual cycle. Menstruation is a magical process that connects women to the moon, to the tides, to the earth, to humanity, and to the very essence of the creation of life, she said at the side of her mouth with a snarky sarcasm. This explanation seemed interesting, but was just as difficult to grasp as the scientific wording in our textbook. While I was quietly conscious of the fact that I was a 15-year-old girl who had yet to get a period, I was mostly uninterested. After all, this didn't seem to apply to me. Instead, I found myself daydreaming about Julio. Wait, is it Julio or is it like Julio? About Julio, the new student from the Dominican Republic, the same place I came from. Julio was tall, dark, lanky, and played baseball. We had similar builds. He spoke broken English and struggled to understand the lessons, so I helped him. I wanted to impress him, so I paid close attention. Say what? Okay. All of a sudden, hereditary traits and Mendel's P's experiment captured my attention. Which parent gave me what features? My mother thought I was a late bloomer like her. At that time, my own Dominicanness was often on my mind. I'm the last in my family to immigrate to the United States from a rural village in Santiago, Dominican Republic. The village, god damn. Oh my gosh, Boca de Bao? Did I say that right? Boca de Bao. Yeah, okay, I said it right. Cool. Thank you. It's a lush, green, hilly, oh my gosh, campo? Okay, with dusty dry valleys, dirt roads, and unreliable electricity. And now, adulthood for a young girl began at menstruation. My mother's menstruation was a long-awaited turning point in her life. My parents met as young teenagers collecting water from a well. Aww. And it was love at first sight. Although they wanted to run away as soon as possible, they waited until my mother began her menstruation cycle. Devout from an early age, as a teen, she was already dating. Una, just this.
Level-headed, steady.
Okay, yeah,
A
that.
serious woman.
A serious one, thank you. And my father was just a joyful farm boy, but she was also a late bloomer. She prayed for her period as she watched her younger sisters marry their suitors. Shortly after turning 18, she got her period and they eloped. In the 80s, there was an exodus from my village towards New York City and New Jersey. When my mother was 3 months pregnant with me, my father left Bow and headed for New York through Mexico. Then, when I was 11 months old, my mother followed, leaving me and my 2 older sisters to be raised by the village of extended relatives, great aunts, grandparents, and cousins. In February 1989, when I was 7 years old, I arrived in Long Island, New York, in the middle of a major blizzard. My upbringing in this middle-class suburban port town provided me with options. Very early on, I recognized that many of the things deemed feminine in my family were optional. Sometimes I opted in and sometimes I opted out. Sometimes I was met with confrontation and sometimes I wasn't. By the age of 15, my reasoning was, if I didn't get a period, if I didn't have breasts, and yet was still considered a woman, then to some extent my gender identity was up to me. But I enjoyed being a woman. Breasts are an obsession in my family. Women sit around and talk about the size of their breasts and the surgeries they would have. Consequently, I was desperately desirous of breasts. Throughout high school, I wore false names. In my junior year of high school, my mother took me to see an endocrinologist and I opted to begin hormone therapy. I was willing to get a period if it meant getting breasts. So like my mother many years before me, I found myself constantly waiting to bleed. Unbeknownst to me, behind closed doors and in church pews, my mother was also praying for blood. While I was thinking about breasts, she was thinking about my future and whether I would become a mother. All of these biological processes occur with the end goal of procreation. Reproduction is entrenched in our identities. I have 5 siblings. On my mother's side, I have 9 aunts, one of whom has 10 children. All 3 of my sisters have kids. Today, I have 7 nephews and 5 nieces. My body exists outside of the biological development processes explained in my science class. Like a voyeur, I stood in the wings watching the women sympathize about a present and future role that didn't include me. I watched as they commiserated over experiences, some of which I didn't want but thought were inevitable. But I knew I wasn't quite one of them because although they made room for me, they did so within a complicit silence, a silence that contained my atypical body, a silence that cradled the ongoing abuse inflicted on their bodies, an abuse that I witnessed but for some reason was spared, leading me to believe I was somehow privileged. In my senior year of high school, I was told my body would produce negligible levels of both estrogen and testosterone, and that any sexual development I was experiencing, like height growth and pubic hair, was catalyzed by other hormones. For example, on average, follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, in an 18-year-old girl is 3. Okay, that's the average level. My FSH levels were 112. My non-sex developmental hormones were working overtime, but after a year on synthetic progesterone and estrogen, my body was still not reacting. In college, I wanted to be desired. I went full force into appearing as feminine as possible, straightening my long black hair, wearing makeup and pink from head to toe. I received newfound attention from men. When I would talk about my body, desirability was a major factor. The fact that I hadn't begun a period was easy to share. It didn't turn men off, and most of my female friends expressed some degree of envy. So you've never had a period? So you can't get pregnant? Lucky, you don't ever have to worry. On the other hand, I rarely shared that. I didn't have breasts and that I was wearing falsies. During spring break of my freshman year, I underwent surgery. When they operated, they found that one of my ovaries was more like testes tissue, and the other ovary was streaked, meaning neither ovary produced eggs. My uterus was an unformed mass that would never carry children. I would never menstruate, even with synthetic hormones. And rather than the oophorectomy, okay, that's a surgery where they remove the ovaries, that was planned, they performed a complete hysterectomy. Does anyone remember what that is? Oh my gosh, good job, you guys. Wow, thank you. They performed a complete hysterectomy. A week later, I was back at school. Senior year of college, I was introduced to Gloria E. Anzaluda. Yes. Anzaluda was a Chicana feminist, queer, lesbian, writer, farm laborer, and academic. Due to a rare uterine formation, can you just come here and say this name? I'm so sorry.
What is it? Anzaluda.
Thank you. Anzaluda began to menstruate at 5 years old. Okay, she recalls how her mother made special cloth underwear to soak up the blood. By the age of 10, she had developed breasts, about which she says, oh, can you come here? I'm so sorry. What does it say?
What other girls don't have?
Okay, cool. By the age of 10, she had developed breasts, about which she says no other girls have. She recalls looking at the cloth diapers being hung up on the clotheslines. Only she and her mother knew about her body. This ritual of deep, complicit silence between her and her mother hid what? Okay, I'm so sorry. I feel like people's names should be properly pronounced, Like a name is an identity, and I feel like I mispronounce a name. I feel so rude. I'm so sorry. I hope you'll forgive me. Okay, hid Anzaluda's body so that they both had forgotten it, and it even occurred the way it did. Okay. Anzaluda changed me. She spoke to my stratified existence as a queer immigrant living in the United States. She spoke to a core silence filled with all parts of me. Suddenly, femininity and masculinity became ephemeral, and gender was a distraction to the omnipresent me. The me that shines beyond all gendered things but can be felt through my gaze. My queer gaze distanced me from the gender-based reproductions of the clan. Anzaluda's stories of finding strength through her... Oh my gosh, can you come here? What does this word say? Okay.
Her message?
Her message fed my...
I don't know.
Okay, well, yes. Anzaluda's stories of finding strength through her...
Something more.
Yeah, fed my... something soul. Like Anzaluda, I'm a storyteller in my family. I observe, ponder, and mull over our generations of stories. The depth of her writing taught me so much so quickly. After reading Anzaluda, I concluded that menstruation exists on a spectrum, that all bodies are like fractals with never-ending layers, spectrums within spectrums. In many ways, my body exists on its own terms: womanhood without breasts, womanhood without a period, womanhood without biological motherhood. My femininity lies beyond the prescribed womanhood. My body expands the boundaries of gender and dismantles the binary simply by existing. But I hardly had to say any of these things because my gaze said it all. When I first started researching intersex bodies, I came across a lot of transgender groups. In these groups, I encountered newfound parallels within the processes of transitioning. Hearing trans men talk about their relationship to their breasts and menstruation helped me understand that I could exist without breasts and be loved. Trans women reaffirmed my singular womanhood when I would read their expressions of the same yearning for breasts that permeated my youth. No matter the point of view, I stood in certain privilege. Unlike many from the trans community at that point in my life, health insurance had covered my breast augmentation. When I came across the intersex community, I fell in love with our vastly different experiences. But I also learned of all the surgeries that had been performed on our bodies without our consent as children. I understood that in many ways, I have been fortunate. I didn't undergo genital mutilation as a child. These surgeries are still an ongoing occurrence in intersex bodies all over the world, including the United States. This body has presented me with options regarding my presentation, regarding my gender role, regarding my sexuality, and created an opportunity for me to create my own path in this life. Existing as an intersex person has pervaded all facets of my life. At first, it was a little secret that manifested in a cheeky smile and yet was the quiet sustenance of my will to exist on my terms. Now that I'm in my mid-30s, it has blossomed into a new expression. And if there is such a thing as reincarnation, I hope to continue returning as an intersex person. I think that was it. Oh, that's a really good one. I don't know if people clap after these, it's not my words, but yes, I will like send this person a letter and say your story was great because that was like actually really good. It was really deep. So what did you pick up from this story that you would like to talk about?
Well, I find it interesting that that person, like you know how you were discussing, like if you were a doctor, would you do the surgery, and this person did undergo the surgery, and they were very happy with the result.
Yeah. Yes, like definitely. But you also have to keep in mind, and they say this too, like that they were living in the United States, right? And so they were like more accepted. But what if they had stayed in the Dominican Republic? You know? But yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Sam.
I think it's really cool how like she talks about how she would express her gender however she wanted. And like I think that in our society we try to make the gender binary is so black and white. It puts so much emphasis on like masculinity or femininity, but it's nice to just be able to just like be yourself without having to worry about that binary.
That's definitely true. And did you like? What did you think of the part where she was talking about interacting with the trans community and finding like solace in like hearing trans women long for breasts and long for more feminine gender expression?
I mean, I feel like that's definitely something she can relate to because. I mean, I can't speak for her personal gender identity, but like, it seems like her body doesn't really totally align with like what she was told. Like, she was told like, oh, like you're supposed to have breasts and you're supposed to menstruate. So maybe it's like that like common theme of like dysphoria running between the two.
Good job. Anybody else? No. Okay. So she talked about like how being an immigrant and being queer influenced her view on her gender identity. Does anyone have anything to say about that?
Is she gay? Like,
I don't know. She just said queer. So, and because like in the LGBTQ community, I think it's LGBTQIA. So intersex is in there. But I mean, there's obviously more letters. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't say the whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. But she just said queer, so. Okay, cool. Did anybody notice when like other people were saying like, oh, like you're so lucky, like you never had a period, you can't get pregnant. But on the inside, like she was feeling like, oh, I've never had a period, like I can't get pregnant. So how do you feel about that? Yeah, that's like very true. You know, a lot of people talk about like, oh my gosh, like I got my period today, like totally sucks. But like you have to think about like there are, you know, people who might not be able to be fertile or might not be able to reproduce. And like obviously it's not like a super sad thing that you're not able to. But there are people who might long for that, you know.
Yeah, it's like it's been very like associated with like quintessential womanhood. It's like if you're a woman, you know, period is just like the essence of being a woman.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of a confusing narrative for lots of people that are women. They can't have periods, people that have periods are not women.
And it's also like in medical terminology, there was a study published in the Canadian Journal of Sociology, I believe. And it was this one graduate student, and she was talking about how historically male reproductive systems, or like the male body, has been treated as being in a state of non-reproduction, you know. But the female body has always been treated as if it's in a state of fertility. It's like when we talk about female bodies, we often talk about them as if they're in a state of fertility, like as if being healthy means being fertile, you know? And she was talking about like, this is a huge issue because there are like women who can't reproduce and women, you know, who may not have been born with eggs in their ovaries or like malformed uteruses, and they might not be able to reproduce, and you're inherently excluding them from medicine by talking about female bodies in this way. So this is not only a problem that is pervasive in society, but also like medically as well. So,
And black is a great tragedy.
Can't.
Like you watch like on TV shows, like someone finds out they can't have children,
And they cry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and like their partner's like, oh, it's okay, but it's like it is not okay. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like clearly a lot of people deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And like personally, my mom had like 13 miscarriages before she had me. So like, I always hear about like, oh, like be like glad for your health or whatever. Like whenever I talk about like I'm never like offhandedly like, oh, I don't want kids, and mom's like, well, like let's hope you have kids, like be grateful for what you have, etc.
Yeah, that's like 100% true. Like a lot of people, like I don't want to say like, please record your period as being very fortunate. Like you're very privileged to have periods, because that makes it seem like, again, if you don't have periods, then you're not privileged, right? But yeah, it is like really sad, like in society, that women are expected to reproduce, but also like slut shamed, you know? Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, no. Okay. I think like also like we can talk about like culturally. Did you like hear like her mother was praying for her to like have a period or to be able to have kids? Like in a lot of cultures, feminine, like a little less so in the U.S. I guess, but femininity is associated with like having kids. Like definitely, like I know in India it like really really is. But I don't know any other cultures like anywhere else. Is it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously. So, I think like the cultural aspect also has something to do with how much she wanted to like have breasts. Like she was saying, like her family members would talk about having breasts, you know. Okay, yeah. What is one thing you've learned from this story, at least? Okay. Anything?
I learned that like taking the hormones doesn't work for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Like, I heard this one gynecologist speak one day, right? And he was like, if you gave me like an 80-year-old woman who has passed menopause, and this was like very weird the way he said it, but he was like, if she had like a functioning uterus and she had like ovaries, and you gave me the right amount of hormones, I can make that uterus bleed. And like he was like, if you have the equipment, we can supply the hormones and we can make this happen. And I was like, okay, like you're literally calling like organs equipment, but okay, it's fine. That's really weird. Yeah, but yeah, like he was like, yeah, that's like very unethical. Like it's like very unethical to like, force an 80-year-old woman to have the ability to reproduce. But it is possible, provided that you have the right organs, right? And oftentimes people think that hormone therapy does work for everyone, but it's like really like you have to have like some form of like formed organs. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Are you okay, Anna? Are you like confused?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Did you like learn anything else?
Right.
Say what?
Right.
Who's saying? Oh yeah. I didn't. I thought you were gonna say the person in the story. I was like, no, I did not. I know. Yeah, I think that's when I went on my name spiel. I was like, my name is a person's identity. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, so like overall, I think like one thing that should be taken away from this story, and obviously like I can't like force you to read this in the way that I have. Oh my God, are you okay? Okay, you sure? Like you good? Okay, like I think one thing that's really important to take away is like oftentimes intersex people, like you can't just like go to them and be like, please tell me your story about being intersex, But I hope that this has like provided you, and obviously she doesn't speak for all intersex people, but has provided you like some form of a view of how people different from you may experience the world, And I like really hope that like in tying back to this conversation in the PFM where somebody was like, oh yeah, I'm uncomfortable talking about intersex people. And I mean that's fine if you are uncomfortable, but I hope that you're able to get educated about this group of people in a safe way without offending anyone. And if I did offend you, please let me know. Like you can talk to me after class. Okay, cool. Yeah. Is anyone know what time it is? 7:49.
Yeah.
Okay. If nobody else has anything to say, I think we might be good, but I do have like a few administrative assignment like announcements today. All right, is that good? Is that good?